Hello and welcome back to the channel, heart friends and fellow students of the Great Mystery. I'm Lily Rose, and today I'm here to talk to you about the outer planet transits for 2019. Now, I am going to do an astrology video this week as well that follows this one, but any astrologer in the business this week with all of the kind of hubbub going on in the external environment has had to take a moment to sort of ground into these outer planet transits and kind of take a look at where we are in the wheel of the year and sort of what the overarching aim of this year is in relationship to our personal quest, but also to our community and our global quest and the sort of the quest of collective consciousness, okay, and how that's presenting in our governments, etc. So when we look at an astrology wheel such as this one, okay, so there are a number of different ways that an astrologer can read these energies. And we know this because in the Middle Ages, of course, right, like astrologers would read these charts in order to try to help a king to rule the government, right, and to rule his people. So we can look at astrology from a personal angle, right, and kind of like our own personal quest, or we can look at it, say, like a financial prediction. Or, so look at it according to the economy. Or we can look at it according to sort of even like mundane, more profane aspects, like that predictions, like when will I find love? Or will I get this job? These sorts of things. Or we can look at it even like what's going on with governments and what the rulers are doing. Or we can look at it like from a theurgistic aspect of, a personal quest and what we're aiming for in soul progress and kind of creating that synergy of theurgy going on with reading the stars, okay? And as a messages and correspondence from the beloved and from the angels, okay? So normally I focus on a theurgistic aspect on this channel. However, it's a good idea at times to take a look at the whole playing board, right? So this conversation is going to be a little bit more from that angle. Now, there's a difference between the inner planets and the outer planets, right? So inner planets, when I say inner planets, I'm talking about the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, okay? Because Saturn is like the innermost, outermost ring. Saturn creates the boundaries and the skin, the casing in which our environment or our reality arises within, right? So it's like the bounds of reality. But outside of this, we have the outer planets, which are Neptune, Pluto, and Uranus, right? So these archetypes or these planets represent different sort of archetypes of our consciousness. And these outer planets are more collectively experienced, okay? So the first thing I want to do is talk for just a moment about what these archetypes represent, sort of according to mythology. And a lot of this is coming from Richard Tarnas, okay, who I've talked about numerous times on the channel. He wrote a book called Cosmos and Psyche and talks about these energies in this way, in an archetypal way, and so kind of like connected to Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell and these sorts of thinkers, right? Like thinking about the mythology and the themes of our culture. So we can start with Neptune, okay? So Neptune represents the waters of our imagination, right? Neptune is sort of a vulnerable space, okay, because it's very slippery. It's not immaterial yet, so it doesn't have those rigid bounds to protect it, like of skin, outer casing. Things are more slippery, and it's a state of becoming. All right, where this process of becoming is very much influenced by our imagination and by sort of more less material thoughts and less tangible aspects, okay? And so imagination, sentiment, emotions, these sorts of things come in and either create, like by the power of positivity and positive thinking, create a gem and jewel of what we wish to draw out of the water, right? Or from conversely, if we let fear get in there and different forms of chaos, then they can create aberrations. Okay, so Neptune, in a sense, like the Buddhists say, gone beyond to the other shore, right? So Neptune is sort of that space of the waters in between this shore and the other shore that goes both ways, okay? And so I consider Neptune to be represented by Oannes, the Atlantean ancestor that has the, the half fish body, right? And this is going back to the Enuma Elish and to Tiamat, the great mother of the sea, and that battle that took place, right? And between Marduk and trying to, champion a champion coming out of the water and having legs and creating the rose, okay? So, and creating something like an offering of art to offer back to the beloved. It's our process of individuation and what that can mean, okay? So there's, these are themes being played on with the Neptunian sort of archetype, all right? Now, we also have Pluto, right? So Pluto represents Hades Dionysus, all right? So Pluto is sort of our subconscious urges. It's described as our id, like Freud describes it as the id, which is like this broiling cauldron of animal instincts that just, push from the inside out, the subconscious realms and the way that these things become guiding forces, hidden forces that guide us. And so it's also described as sort of the blind, seething urge to will and power and dominion. Okay, so it can be experienced in a number of different ways. If we think about it more like Hades, it can be more of the, and sort of from a more sinister perspective, it can be this blind urge to will and power and dominion that we see in our world leaders as they scramble to take over the global domination, right? So this seething urge to do that, right? And manipulate and do this. But on the other hand, it can also be experienced like Dionysus or Bacchus, the god of wine. Okay, so this is where the fruits that come up in the summer solstice and at the Lion's Gate become fermented, and we taste them and get the spirits, the spirit, the more etheric spiritual aspects of the fruit, and become drunk on them like lovers in love with the beloved, right? So this is like ecstatic poetry, ecstatic dance, and you can experience this very tangibly, like if you step into like I'm a little old school, but if you step into like a Grateful Dead concert or a String Cheese or Widespread Panic or Fish, right? And you jump into that like mosh pit of love, as it's been described by the String Cheese fans, right? It's like this mosh pit of love where there's this meditative process going on where you like kind of escape from your own ego and merge into this like seething mass of love and dance, right? That's so transcends the individual. You become part of a collective, and it rips apart these bounds of individuation and ego that allow us to just go wild and free, right? The greatest feeling. Okay, so this is also the Hades, Dionysus, Plutonian urge to sort of transform and alchemize and be the phoenix that rises from the ashes. Okay. So this is how we experience the Plutonian archetype. Now, there's also Uranus, right, who's related to Prometheus. And Prometheus is a character in Greek mythology that when we were being formed, when man was being formed, all of the great gifts were given out to all of the animals, and Prometheus decided that he would steal the fire of inspiration, the Pentecostal flames of progress and novelty and art and everything, forward thinking, and lit up by the wands or the fire aspect of illumination for the humans. Okay, so it's a little bit mischievous, okay, and rebel rousing. instinct of forward progress that's very edgy and for, like I said, forward thinking. So this is Uranus, okay? And then we also have, now we have a dichotomy between Saturn, okay, who's represented by Kronos, the old school father archetype, that was the father of the Titans, and Zeus, or Jupiter, who is the new school ruler of the rising, right, or the new school leader of the people, the Philosopher King. All right. Now we know in Greek mythology that that Kronos was the father, right, and Rhea of the earth was the mother, and that Kronos ate all of her babies, okay? So when it came to Zeus, who was the last child, Rhea tricked Kronos, and she had him eat a rock. And then she sent Zeus off to live with like the nymphs, okay? And he was raised by nymphs. And then as he grew older, she prepared him to take over the throne by trickery, and he also he was poisoned and he vomited up his other brothers and sisters, okay? And so these are the Olympians, the new school, all right? So he had devoured them, and then they re-emerge. Now, so we see that the story between Zeus and Kronos has to do with a changing of the guard, okay, and moving from, you know, sort of a more old school, rigid, authoritarian, crusty, decrepit, mature, fiscally, you know, sound, you know, everything that's represented sort of by the old school father archetype, and the new sort of younger son who sees how the society needs to move and be updated in order to rule in a just way that's also like philosophically beautiful, all right? And so there's a real dichotomy going on between those two. Now, the reason why I'm telling you this is that because of like the outer planet transits for 2020 are very much connected to this story of the changing of the guard, all right? And it's because that in 2020, we're going to have something called a grand conjunction, all right? And these are 20-year transits that are the meeting of Jupiter and Saturn, all right? So every 20 years, these two sort of face off. And it happens in threes, like in triplets, okay? And the three transits form a triangle, or a trine in astrology. You know, if we were to connect three signs here, Gemini, Aquarius, and Libra, it would make a trine, right? Like a trine aspect on the astrology wheel. And so it's represented here just by the triangle, right? So we see Libra on this side, Aquarius here, and Gemini up here, all right? And so every 20 years, there is a conjunction between these three. However, it's an 80-year process, all right? Now, the first conjunction that we were dealing with happened in 1980 in Libra. Now, we had what was called a grand mutation, that in 2000, we went to an earth sign in Taurus. And this happens, okay? But in 2020, we're going back to the air sign of Aquarius. Then in 2040, we'll go back to Libra. And in 2080, up to Gemini. Okay, so this is an 80-year triangle. All right, so we are just entering it fully in 2020. However, there was a preview of it in 1980, all right? Now, these conjunctions are really interesting. So we know that they're important because there's, you know, the mythology is based on it, right? You know, so of the story between the changing of the guard of the old school and the new school. So we know that it must be important, right? But we further know that it's important because it's the esoteric significance of what's happening there, right? Because Saturn forms the bounds of our reality and the bounds of our experience. It's like the skin that holds our experience. And so Jupiter and Saturn conjunctions are forming this bound of our reality and our governments and sort of the way that the philosophy is working, okay? It's sort of that sort of creates the bounds of our reality. So that's esoterically significant in that way. We also know that the Dogon tell us that the Dogon, who are an African tribe that, and Robert Temple in the Serious Mystery, a book called The Serious Mystery, did a lot of research around it and brings forward a lot of information that helps us to understand that these are also connected to the rotations of Sirius A and Sirius B. So even with regard to the epochs of consciousness, this is very important, okay? Because they understand that the way that these star patterns in Sirius are moving define our consciousness, or our epochs of consciousness, okay? And so two conjunctions, two Saturn and Neptune conjunctions, there's a 60-year process going on here as it connects to Sirius A and Sirius B. And Santos has an interesting video on it. It's a short clip, and I can link to it in the show notes, that talks about how it's related to, the reason why it's longer is it's related to the coming back around of the curve and when it gets to the midpoint, right? So, and when they're moving apart, we're moving apart in consciousness away from sort of the golden age. But as it starts to come back around, we're moving closer in towards the golden age kind of consciousness, okay? Now, we know that also that there are 60 stones in Stonehenge, okay? So there's lots of information pointing to the significance of these conjunctions, right? And it's always been connected to epochs of consciousness. Now, when I talk about epochs of consciousness, I mean the age of Taurus, the age of Pisces, the age of Aries, the age of Pisces, the age of Aquarius, right? Okay, so this is important, right? So we're talking about ushering in the age of Aquarius. Now, with the Airy Trigon in 2020, with the conjunction being made in Aquarius, okay, it's going to happen in December at the winter solstice of 2020, all right? Now, we know additionally that the age of Aquarius is thought to have come in the 60s, okay? So I think it was on February 5th, 1962. I can double check that. But Santos has an amazing chart, and he is, of course, you know, a senior to me, and was, you know, thinking about this a lot earlier than I was, and he has noticed this chart in February of, I think it was 1962, and it was February 5th. And all of the planets are in Aquarius. And he heard a Manly Hall discussion. You know how these things happen, right? When we have a question on our mind and little bits of information start to come in from the angels, right? And so he heard at the opportunistic moment this talk by Manly Hall that gave the research information that he needed in order to find the chart, okay? And so the chart that he found was on this day in 1962. I'm pretty sure. I'll double check the year. And so we know that, so that in the 60s that this age of Aquarius was apparently starting to come in because of this formation, all right? Now, we also know that in the 60s that there was the first Pluto-Uranus conjunction of the current one that we're talking about, right? Like, there have been other Pluto-Uranus conjunctions, and we'll get to that as well. But the one that we're talking about that, that's current for us right now, began in the 60s as well. And there was a Pluto-Uranus conjunction in Virgo. Now, we know that this conjunction brought in, it was like the summer of love, right? Like, I can even pull a chart that was the first acid test where the Grateful Dead and the Warlocks came out to play, right? So there's a real psychedelic revolution, it's just a movement of liberation, and the way that the previous bounds of society had kept our philosophies held back, okay, start to break open in the 1960s. We see women's rights, we see civil rights, we see religious freedoms coming in, all different. We see, right to love whoever you want, these sorts of things starting to come in, right, in the 1960s. Now, in 2012 time, when we got to the Pluto-Uranus square, right, so this was the second part, okay, this is where we start to see a critical tension happening between the archetypes that start to allow for tangible evidence and results of this initial conjunction to manifest, right? And so in 2012 time, the ending of the Mayan calendar, these sorts of things, we started to see a real renaissance of information coming through the internet. Now, the Rosicrucians talked about having like an invisible library, right? This was way before the internet, way before, right? So they thought of this idea of how they could have a library where everybody could learn what they needed to learn because so much information had been kept from us and was unavailable, right? And so they had this idea, right? Well, we see this digital sort of invisible library coming in with the, really strongly around the time of 2012, where everyone and their brother started to become woke AF, right? It's the 100th monkey idea where, we started sharing information. But beyond just sort of that ascension 5D sort of Merkaba, more like trendy, movement in American popular religions or Western popular religions. Beyond that, we also see a real revealing of information that has led us to be able to have a wider view on what's going on in our governments and things like that as well. So when we say that we're woke AF, like we're not just talking about understanding positive thinking, law of attraction, meditation, how all of these things are affecting our spirituality and our theurgistic process, right, of becoming a star and ascending to the stars, like because of religious freedoms and things like that. We're also seeing a real excavation and revealing of information related to banking cartels, relating to moon landings and different scientific things that are holding us back or maybe corrupt. We're seeing information about the way that the wars worked previously and what was really going on in the deep state and things like that, because we were accepting a narrative, right? There's a narrative being given to us, and up until this point, we were really accepting that narrative. But around 2012, with this information renaissance, we began really also seeing through that narrative, being able to put that together for ourselves because we had the information, right? And not to mention there was also 9/11 that happened, okay? So, which happened, of course, very close to this conjunction in 2000, okay, of the Grand Conjunction, all right? And so, that began in the Earth sign, began to take away a lot of our liberties, but we didn't even know it, right? And so, then, now, at this point, right, as we're approaching this 2020 conjunction, we know that in the Pluto-Uranus conjunction cycle, right, according to Richard Tarnas, that historically, so what he's done is he's gone back through history and he's taken outer planet transits and he's correlated them with various turns of history as well as art and the way that philosophers are expressing their experience as these turns are happening, right? As the changes in the zeitgeist are kind of happening in these critical, foundational sort of ways. And he's noticed that, according to the way that it works in history and how it's worked previously, that when we get to the time of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, right, which is the first outer planet transit of this year that happened in December, it happened in January of 2020, okay? That when we get to that point, okay, that what happens next is that there is a square that will form between Saturn and Uranus, okay? And that the square between Saturn and Uranus is the point where historically we see that the tensions reach their breaking point and sort of like a crisis ensues. And that's where we see typically the breakout of war, all right? And so we also know that that is coming up in our society, all right? So next February in 2021, we'll have the first square between Saturn and Uranus, all right? But it's not just a one-shot deal. This square between Saturn and Uranus is typically like other typical outer planet transits that happen in three-part gulps, all right? And then additionally, I want to talk about one more aspect that lets us know that this is a longer trajectory than just simply that it's coming in February of next year, all right? Now, what I want to talk about is something called anti-scion. And of course, I learned this from reading, so it's probably not pronounced correctly, right? Like anti-scion. But what it relates to, it's an astrological, like really like kind of, technical astrology term, all right? And it has to do with the fact that the signs that rise direct, all right? And this has to do with the growing sun versus the waning sun, all right, in the year. So the signs that rise direct obey the signs that rise crooked, all right? And rising crooked means that it rises in the springtime, right? After the winter solstice point in Capricorn. The signs from Capricorn to Cancer rise crooked, and the ones from Cancer to Capricorn rise direct, all right? So in essence, what's being said is that the ones that rise direct are blue shift, okay? Because that's the in-breath. It correlates to the wheel of the year, all right? So these rising direct are the blue shift, and these rising crooked are the red shift, okay? And the signs that rise direct, the blue shift, dictate or define the ones that rise crooked. So the ones that rise crooked obey the ones rising direct, okay? It's the way that it's said in the text. So in my understanding, according to the in-breath of will and the out-breath of grace, right? Like when we're in the in-breath of will, we're working hard to raise our will, and it's according to like our efforts and our work and what we're doing. Like we're sacrificing, we're working hard. It's the beginning of the school year in fall, right? Like you can kind of think about that because we do tend to be that way. So, and that in the spring, it's the receiving of grace, that it's really more the out-breath, right? So that these energies, we're just trying to come into alignment with the will of spirit and with the way that the naturally arising, we're kind of trying to be more of in a flow state. Whereas in the blue shift, we're drawing into our inner resources and relying upon our work and our will, okay? Raising our will. So we're doing something more actively in the blue shift. And it's my theory that what we do in the blue shift defines what we see arise in the red shift, okay? So in our internal process, we notice that like around here, of course, not at the summer solstice, but more at the Libra ingress, we have like the Day of Atonement in the Jewish cycle of religious literature. And, I think that's really wise. They actually start their year there. And that's kind of interesting because this is actually what will define what we see come up on the red shift, okay? It's like how we work. The intentions, for instance, it's the Virgo full moon, like about right now, a couple hours ago, it reached fruition, right? So in August, we set intentions during the blue shift and we worked really hard on them. And now here in Pisces, we're seeing that red shift of that come to fruition. It's not an active thing, right? Like as active, although it's always good within the moon cycle, which is more, it has its own red shift and blue shift, right? To work actively, etc. It's not saying just don't do anything during this period, but as far as the sun's concerned, that we'll be receiving, that moon, receiving the fruitions of that. Okay, so it's interesting, right? But the reason why I'm saying that is because we see, now I have like 500 pieces of paper down here of all the work that I've done. But we see that it's not until 2026 that we actually see the fruition, the last fruition of Saturn square Uranus come up through the red shift, okay? Because during all these different years, during all these different years, we see other outer planets transits happening, on the versus the red and the blue shift, right? It's moving around, like how we're actively working it with our will and how we're receiving it, and then how we're refining, making, like after we've received it, how we digest that lesson, come to the scales of Ma'at and get the judgment, and how we make our intentions to correct ourselves or work and refine it, right? And so this comes around and around. It's a few cycles, all right? And so it's not until the blue shift of 2015 that we have Pluto trine Uranus, and then we'll receive Pluto trine Uranus in the red shift, okay? And I don't want to go into all the detail of that because it's like getting super far out, right? But I'm just kind of letting you know that it's not an overnight process, right? And that we can expect tension coming up between these outer players, right? As the years progress, okay? Now, it is also said that when Saturn comes into hard square with Uranus, okay, that in the past, that this has brought the breakout of the Civil War, as well as the Russian Revolution, okay, previously, right? So we see these themes coming up very strongly in our own experience as well, all right? And I guess, let's see, what else did I definitely want to say in this video? Okay, so what does this mean for us as of right now, right? So like, what do we do with this for right now? And I think that just knowing this helps us to understand where, like, I don't want to overly focus on what the warlords are doing with this information. What I want to focus on is what the lovers are doing with this information, okay? And sort of how this plays into 2020, right? Like where we are now, all right? Because this is very much on the focus for this year, right? As we're approaching this 2020 conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, right? So Jupiter at this point is in Capricorn, right? So the new hero is in the structures of the old world as they're seizing and breaking down, okay? And he's trying to think positively because Jupiter is positively oriented. He's a benefactor. He's a benefic, right? So he's thinking positively, and he's trying to think how he can be constructive rather than destructive. Because, ultimately the Philosopher King wants to take care of the whole society and recognizes that although there's a huge percentage of 100th monkeys who are woke AF, there's a much larger percentage of people who are not on board, okay, for whatever reason. Either they're older and they have sage advice and wisdom, right? If you've lived through wars, you may have a different perspective. Like you're going to be more centrist in your understanding. And Jupiter wants to be this as well. Okay, we want to be constructive rather than destructive because the history of revolutions are not good, right? Like, although change gets pushed through, there's a lot of death and bloody wars that occur in pushing through a new regime, all right? And so, although I don't think that we can avoid a regime change, that is what is happening. I think that everyone who is their own Philosopher King and trying to lead the beings around them wants to have a positive mindset of thinking how to work constructively if possible, okay? And so we know that so at the time of January 12th, that we had this Pluto and Saturn conjunction, all right? And this is very important, and because it's still very latent energies, we're seeing the effects. It was sort of hidden, right? Like the seedy nature of it happened, but it's like to see the effects of it, it's happening more slowly, right? So we know that right around this time was the time when our government killed the Iranian military leader, right, and really changed the game of the Arab Spring yet again. Okay, so there was a big change in 2000, and as we had the 9/11, and now we're having another shift of it. We're seeing evidence of that occurring, right? And so we got to think about the archetypes of Pluto and Saturn. All right, so Pluto as Hades Dionysus, right? This is Freud's urge, the broiling cauldron of instincts. It's Nietzsche's Dionysian principle. It's Schopenhauer's blind striving of universal will. And it's also Apollo versus Dionysus, which if you look at Joseph Campbell's talk on that, it's really kind of interesting. So Apollo is the god of music and the rainbow, right? All the colors of the theurgy, it's all the light. Where Dionysus is the dark, seething urge to like alchemize and burn it down and rise from the ashes. And so but those two work together. They're not opposing forces. Okay, so as far as the Philosopher King understands, right? But we also know that Kronos, right, Saturn, who also met together in this conjunction, is the old bones of the dying world. He's the limit, the structures, the concrete, the temporal, the gravitas, as Tarnas says, is the systems and corporations and the structures of our society, right, that hold it together, is Saturn, right? But he's also the old school. And so these two things met in a conjunction where Pluto amplifies the Saturnian instinct or the Saturnian archetypes in like really like guttural ways. It's like like a blind urge and a seething urge to Saturn, right? To do the Saturn, to rigidify, create limits, this sort of thing. Now, depending on how woke someone is or what their aim is and kind of what their ideology is and how they're approaching life and how awake they are, kind of dictates their response to this happening, right? Like how they're embodying it, both in their psychology and in their actions. And so we have people who are like woke, like they know what's going on, but they're the leaders, like the government leaders, like like the warlords. They know what's going on. They've always known what's going on, but their response to this is to amplify and rigidify the boundaries. It's kind of like a scramble for world domination going on, right? They want to increase their boundaries. They want to increase their limits and rigidify the structures that they already have, okay? And it's this really like dark urge to come into world dominion, all right? So we see big power plays happening around that. Now we have woke people who have, by the power of this square renaissance of information, have come to understand the limits of our society and how they're obstructing our progress and how they're obstructing our sole purpose as a collective and the stewardship of the earth and the animals and each other and the collective participation in what we call the earth, right? And so these people have more of a seething urge for rebirth, okay? Because Capricorn is also the point of rebirth. Okay, it's death and rebirth in Capricorn. It's the point where Jesus is reborn. So there's, they're having an urge to kind of alchemize all of that darkness, burn down, tear down those structures, like Dionysus, right? They're experiencing it more like that, and to take rebirth, like the phoenix, to rise from the ashes of this new world order. All right. And I say that not with the, sinister aspect of the New World Order, but as the Philosopher King, like our new world. And so, but we're also seeing it like, also sort of that darkness, like eat the rich, right? And burn it down. They have the seething urge to do something, all right? To get up and stand up, all right? So, you want to keep that in mind for the Jupiter-Pluto conjunctions, right? Because, Jupiter represents the new Philosopher King and Pluto, this seething urge to get up, stand up, you know? And then another way we have people experiencing this archetype, or this conjunction of Saturn and Pluto, is that they're sleepers, right? And so they are getting caught in fear, deception, and they're really worried about their security because they see the trusses are shaking, right? And there's a storm blowing in, and they don't really have all of the information. And so they're just blindly following, you know, attaching to father figures and following those people and getting in their family so that they can be safe, right? And they're just, it's a blindness and sheeple kind of vibe. And then we have people who are like half woke, right? They're intelligent enough to have participated in this renaissance of information, but they're weighing it against okay boomer, it's okay boomers, because they're weighing it against their past experiences of the old world and how they have mature advice for the younger generation, and they're wanting to kind of maintain the status quo. Because they also have securities and houses and like bank accounts and things like this. They have more security. And so they're, you know, the boomers are, you know, for that okay boomers, you know, are more half woke, right? And so they're experiencing this in between wanting to move towards a new world and for their grandchildren, but also worried about preserving that old world. They want to pass on their legacy, right, and that security to their family. So they're sort of more in between, right? So we see people experiencing this or processing this in different ways. Now, let's see. So we know that in 2020, right, that we have so the major transits of 2020, beyond the Saturn-Pluto conjunction and the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. Okay, so Saturn-Pluto happened in January of 2020. It's really shaking breaking down the structures and forcing in the new world. And Jupiter and Saturn conjunction, which will be on the winter solstice of this year, right, which will be when the Philosopher King meets the warlords, or meets the kings of the old world, and castrates him, right, and the new age is brought in, right, so he takes the virility and moves forward. That doesn't mean that the Saturn's just going to give up, right? The old system, right? Because we understand that it's going to be a process that lasts through 2026. Now, but we know that the other major transits that are happening beyond these two biggies, bad uns, is that we have oh, I didn't write it, but that's okay. We have Jupiter sextile Neptune 3 times, and we have Jupiter conjunct Pluto 3 times, okay? So Jupiter sextile Neptune, so Jupiter's in Capricorn. Jupiter is the new Philosopher King. He's the new hero. He's like the young businessman, okay, that's trying to figure out these financial structures that are his empire for guiding his people in the new world in a philosophically beautiful way, okay? So he's in Capricorn, right? And he's meeting up against, he's kind of like in a business meeting with the old system, all right? And he's looking to work constructively, but at the same time, he's not denying all of the problems and limitations, but he's looking to work constructively, and he's in this business meeting, right? And it's not looking good, okay? They're really coming down heavy on him and very critical, right? So they have the structure of the old world, and Jupiter is kind of like not in his home turf, okay? And so Neptune in Pisces is the spiritual aspect, right? Neptune, Oannes, the potential of becoming, is pushing energy by sextile. He's pushing a ray of energy by sextile to Jupiter, because Jupiter rules Pisces where, here's Pisces. So Jupiter rules Pisces where Neptune is, and Jupiter's here in Capricorn. And Neptune is pushing energy to this Jupiter to help him out, to help loosen up some of these boundaries and be like, you know what? That's the way they're seeing it. It's very rigid, but yet remember, it's all actually illusory, right? Like everything changes. Like we're pushing these spiritual aspects of a higher philosophy and a higher view to Jupiter as he's in there in that business meeting, and reminding him of the beauty of becoming. and the beauty of reaching back to and tying back in refuge to the spiritual world, okay? So 3 different times Jupiter's going to be getting this energy pushed to him while he's in this business meeting, all right? And 3 different times Jupiter is going to conjunct Pluto. Okay, so Jupiter, the new philosophical king, conjuncting that seething urge to rip apart those boundaries and alchemize them to let the phoenix be reborn. All right. And so, you know, at the same time, while those boundaries are pushing back, trying to maintain order in their control and dominion over the old world. All right, so Jupiter will get 3 strong reminders of the fact that, you know, that he needs to rip apart those boundaries in order so that, and those limitations and obstacles, so that that way the phoenix can take rebirth here at the winter solstice in 2020. All right. Now, so what's happened so far? Right? And what I find interesting is that I mapped these on the wheel of the ecliptic. Okay, so we understand that in this wheel of ecliptic that we have a psychological story going that relates to our process, our soul progress each year, and the different seasons, and how this is our karma ripening, and how we're working on our karma, and how the karma is ripening. Right? So in the blue shift, we're working on our karma, planting seeds of karma, like using our will to work on the karma. And in the red shift, those seeds of karma are just coming to fruition. Okay, and we're aligning with them and trying to receive the energies and the lessons. Okay, so we understand that also translates to this wheel, where the red shift is from Capricorn down here up to the summer solstice, and then from the summer solstice to the winter solstice is the blue shift. All right, and we also understand that the Capricorn point is the exit to the cave. It's the out breath, the exit to the cave, and that the Cancer point is the entrance to the cave, or the in breath. It's where we go inward and start working in our will. Okay, and so we see that the first conjunction between Saturn and Pluto happened just at the very beginning of the red shift in January. Okay, so after the winter solstice, we're receiving this major conjunction. Okay, now the question then becomes, right, so if we recognize that what we've started receiving in 2020 is that Saturn-Pluto conjunction, the question then becomes, what were the blue shift transits of 2019 that we're receiving in fruition during the red shift? What were we working on, right? And so I want to remind you that in the blue shift of 2019, what we were working on as we went into the cave internally was Jupiter square Neptune, okay, Saturn sextile Neptune, Jupiter square Saturn, Jupiter square Neptune, and Saturn sextile Neptune. Okay, and so just in a nutshell, what that had to do with was tempering the philosophical, like the new philosophical king, right? Tempering his vision to meet reality. Okay, so there was a real tempering of the ideals and the ideals of the leadership and this philosophical understanding to temper it to reality and our limits and our constraints and things like this, so that way that what we were bringing forward in this shift of the red shift this year was more grounded and more realistic and less fancy and less like individuals like all have their own ideals and their own fancy, right? So it sort of tempered that to be more collective, more to serve the collective more than just our own particular whims, right? And so there was a lot going on working on our own spiritual vision in relationship with the new philosophy and how to temper that for reality. So we were working on that strongly in the red shift and in the blue shift. And now in the red shift, we first received the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. Okay, so and then in February, toward right at the shift between Aquarius and Pisces, we received the first pushing of the energy from Jupiter from Neptune to Jupiter, right? So, we're coming in and Jupiter's in those boundaries trying to work with these old systems, and he's receiving that light to be like, it's going to, this is the light. It's very actually at this point in the year, right? It's not solid yet. We're getting ready to go through Pisces, where the cosmic egg of the year is rising to the surface. That's rising to the surface. That's going to take rebirth at the Aries ingress, right? Which is coming up very soon in 2 weeks. Okay, and so for 2020 in the redshift, we're receiving this pushing of energy, helping us around Groundhog's Day, and then this very first Pluto Jupiter conjunction that's going to be happening right after the Aries ingress. So as the Fool steps out into the journey and the cosmic egg has risen above the surface waters of Pisces and begins to be out and about the town, right? And to sort of get out there and start to mix with people and start to network and these sorts of things and begin to offer our work for this year, Jupiter is going to conjunct Pluto, which is reminding us of that seething urge to change those limitations, change those structures, but to try to work constructively to do that, okay? But then as we get to the summer solstice, right, at the very top where we offer the rose of our year, we get to another Jupiter-Pluto conjunction, right? So this final phase of the redshift, where the bloom breaks out and then starts to form, where you can see the colors of the corolla coming through, and then as it opens the corolla up to the sun, its gift for the year. This is the art that I've made this year. My gift, kind of like we go to a Girl Scout brownie thing where we trade little gifts that we made. Like we used to make safety pins with little seed beads on them and pass those out, right? So people could put them on their shirt. Like we have these gifts that we want to offer to all of our friends and people around us, right? In love, to share the love. And so we offer this rose up to the beloved. And at that very point, there's also this seething sort of reminder of that collectively together that we want to alchemize this space so that we can all share a more beautiful experience. Now, at the same time, however, we'll have the world powers of dominion also scrambling to increase their limits, increase the stranglehold of the authority on the new Philosopher King, right? Like they're going to be experiencing, like in their minds, they're Jupiter, okay? That Jupiter's like the money. It's like how we're making money. It's like all of the abundance issues, right? And so they're going to be trying to control that as well. So just see this thing play out, and we also have to recognize that we're astrologers, and we have the astrology with which to cast our best laid efforts, but they also have it, and they have it in a much more mature form, and their rituals and etc. They have never lost it, okay? So my guess is that they're likely using this, right? And so that they know these things as well. And there are other movements that happen, right, that they can then insert things in order to feed the frenzy, right, to serve their interest, okay? And on that note, I didn't watch the whole thing, but as I was making the chalkboard, I did look for a minute at the Leo King had talked about this Virgo full moon, and about, and he's pointing out how well, I'll get to that probably more when I talk about the process of Mercury's retrograde this cycle and how he's going direct. But, it's like, we're listening to hear the voice of the Great Spirit and come into alignment, because that's what Mercury is asking us to do. But there's this other voice that's man-made that's coming in, and it thinks it's God too. So it's coming in that same ear, right? And it's the manipulation of the arising by the world powers and throwing in these pandemics and things like this, oil prices falling, these kinds of things, in order to play on the natural energies and move the collective consciousness in its favor by way of coercion. Okay, so you have to guard against that, and I'm not saying it's not real. I'm just saying it's Machiavellian, right? Like they're doing it on purpose in order to guide this, to be in control, preserve their power, right? And so at the point of the highest point of the moment when we offer our rose and it becomes inseminated for 2020, this is when the second gulp of the Pluto Jupiter conjunction happens, right? Where this new Philosopher King just feels into that seething urge to jump in the mosh pit of love, right? And rip it all apart and create this beautiful glitter fest for all of the beautiful, beautiful people, right? And we're going to give everyone bread and fish and loaves, right? Like we want to feed everyone and have everyone just enjoy the good life together, right? So there'll be this, you know, and we're taking that in to raise our will around it, okay? And create the red shift for next year. Because when we get to that point, that's when that starts to happen. So as we're working our will during the blue shift of next year, the first transit that we're going to receive is one of those Neptune sextile Jupiter that pushes the light of spirituality to Jupiter and reminds him that, you know, things are not as solid as they seem. There's fear porn, there's panic, there's rigidity and things coming in, and not to let those create aberrations in our philosophy. And then as we get to the Libra point and the scales of Ma'at, where our rose and what we've created for this year is being judged, and we're receiving critique, and we're being asked to work on our thing, right? So that it's more of service to humanity, so that it's less individual ego, right? And more service of the gifts that Spirit has called us to bring. It's a constant process of revision in that. And so the first will receive another pushing of the energy from Neptune to Jupiter during that phase, okay? And so again, after we go through that judgment process, and sort of receiving our critique, we'll receive another pushing of light from Neptune to Jupiter, reminding him of the fluid nature and of the higher mind of philosophy, our ideals, and those ideals that have already been tempered by reality by the 2019 blue shift. So we'll be receiving that another pushing there at the Libra point. And then when we get to Scorpio, to sort of the place where the threshold is thin and we're down in the underworld working, on the death kind of process before rebirth, we're going to receive the final Jupiter conjunct Pluto transit, reminding us, you know, kind of our seething urge to take birth as the new Philosopher King, as that new businessman, you know, that's able to navigate the terrain in order to make it work for the collective so that we can all experience sort of the beautiful abundance that is our natural birthright, right, as humans, okay? And so they're in the Scorpio point. And then when we get to the winter solstice, that point of rebirth, right, when the sun begins to grow and all the inside of those seeds start to stir and begin to take root, that is when Jupiter will conjunct Saturn, okay? And that is when the old world will meet the new, you know, the old school versus new school will have a face-off. All right, and that will be the first corner of this airy trigon. All right, so I want to talk about just a couple of other things in relationship to this, right? One of them has to do with this airy trigon, right? Because we know that air element represents swords, right, in the tarot deck. It's our ideas, our thoughts, our mental activity, these sorts of things. It's detached from the heart a little bit. It's very Aquarian in nature, but also, of course, Gemini and Libra, right? We can think about all of these archetypes to kind of get a feel for what this airy trigon represents, right? And we also know that Uranus is in Taurus right now. That's also really playing into this, and that Saturn is getting, once this conjunction actually happens with Saturn in Aquarius, okay? So it happens at the very beginning degrees of Aquarius, which is also interesting with regard to ushering in the Aquarian Age. And we know that it's also, we know that Uranus rules Aquarius in modern rulership, okay? So there's a real value to the digital landscape that's coming up. Both Saturn and Jupiter know that the future of business is in the digital landscape, all right? Our world has moved from sort of the industrial revolution and the production of commodities that are tangible to the production of commodities that are idea-based, okay, that are intangible, that are software programs, that are videos, that are these sorts of things, right? The products and the commodities are becoming intangible. And so both Saturn and Pluto recognize this, although Saturn is also very concerned with oil, gas, you know, these sorts of things that fuel the society and create money, and loans, and these sorts of things, right? Like I can see them going on that, but at the same time, they're not stupid, and they know that the future of business is in the internet and in digital format, and that these commodities are becoming less tangible. And the question becomes what to do with the workers, etc., and how to feed everybody. And you know, we don't actually have to have everybody working 40 hours a week and have the money society like it is. According to Jupiter, Jupiter sees that, but Saturn does not see that at all, because he's got all of those, you know, the banking structures that are part of his deal. And he's needing this sort of authoritarian military-like rolling of society, okay, that wants to keep, big brother that wants to keep you in check, okay, make sure you're going to work every day so that way you're not out making art and being subversive, okay. And so, so we see that this, this digital landscape becomes very important, okay? And so we're going to see, I believe, as Saturn comes in to Aquarius, there will start to be limitations and cleanup projects going on in the digital landscape. Now, this is both good and bad. This is bad because it's going to limit our freedom. Okay, it's gonna limit our freedom of expression on the internet. We'll see channels coming down. We'll see, censoring of free thought. All right, which is bad. But on the upswing of it, we also may be able to recognize, at least I do, that there is a huge soup of self-educated quasi-professionals out there that have self-educated during this Pluto-Uranus square and the renaissance of information, right? Many of us have recognized how college systems had kept our thought contained and didn't teach us what we needed to know in order to navigate this digital landscape in the new business world, right? So there's a ton of self-educated quasi-professionals. And although that's beautiful, at the same time, the way that academia and scholarship has always worked is that, there's something called the zone of proximal development, which means that students learn in a much more professional and up-leveled way when they're in relationship with an authority in the discipline that knows all of the most refined information, right? It's kind of like classical education versus public school education. Many of us in this quasi-educated, professional soup, right, in the middle, went to public school. So we don't even have the benefit of a classical education with which to bounce off all of this information that we have. But if we had that, it would refine our understandings in really large ways, right? And it's like the best and the brightest, right? Like there are the best and the brightest minds all over the place, but it's like your family history and what the education of your grandparents and before them and the aristocratic bourgeoisie society has always been better educated, and they have a better grasp of some of the just that make it more artful, right, and make the scholarship more accurate, okay? And In the middle, though, you know, of course, we have something that they don't have, which is a relevancy that can't be bought, right? And the firsthand experience. And also, haven't been held in by the way it has been done in the past, so that we've been able to make these novel improvements that are actually really brilliant, okay? So there's a lot of brilliant information coming up from the middle. It just needs sort of a structuring in order to help it out, right? Like I can see that being of somewhat benefit, right? So I'm not going to go into it, like, because I mean, I have some opinions on that I won't share at this moment, but I do see that working, right? Whereas, you've got people in the middle that are only partially, like they've only done this part, and then they go out there and start preaching it, and it really sort of smears the higher vibe of it, right? Like say astrology, like somebody that doesn't know astrology, then they go and post that it's some moon, and it's not even the right moon right then, right? And so nobody resonates with that information that they put out because it wasn't even the right moon. And then, or they did, and then they start to discount astrology, this sort of thing, right? So, there is some level of it. And then also I can see how the structures aren't really there to help us profit from our creative endeavors as much. And if we organized networks of digital communities and had more organization, not only would it provide for more economic gain to have structures, right? But also even in the community, just as for social engagements, if we had more different structures, more structure around what's going on, then we would be able to share more, right? It's kind of like Discord now has, all these different rooms and stuff, and you see the kids kind of organizing in a way that's much more effectual and much more positive than, say, Facebook or Instagram. Discord is really on the edge. Like if people get in a fight, they can go in a private room and have a convo, right? They can call each other on the app, right? You can do that in Facebook too, but whatever, so you see how some revision might actually be helpful. So Jupiter's down for this, but Saturn is doing it with not that sort of aim, and is wanting to censure information in order to preserve the bones and the structures of the old world and increase its dominion, right? So we might see some problems coming in with that. We also know that the nodes are going to be shifting into Gemini and Sagittarius, right? Which tells us that the North Node is coming in Gemini, which means a lot of information is going to, we're going to be actively, it's the in-breath. It's kind of odd. Like I always have to remind myself because it's not what I want it to be according to the symbols. But the in-breath is the North Node. So we're going to be drawing in our will around being more flexible, being teachable, being not an expert, right? Recognizing that although we've done all of this self-education, that there may be college professors out there that are like maybe 60 to 80 who might, who are definitely, we already know this, right? Like how can we come into the zone of proximal development with them in order to kind of get more towards the Sagittarius angle of the polarity. But the South Node is going to be in Sagittarius, which is the out-breath, which is what we're letting go of, what we're receiving, what we're coming into alignment with. And that is going to be, letting go of already being an expert, letting go of having the highest view already and being, the A-team leader of the whole thing, right? We're coming into being more teachable and letting go of being the expert, all right? So flexibility is going to be a real thing here, right? If Jupiter's trying to compromise and work constructively, then, we need to be teachable, we need to be flexible, and we need to see both sides of the story, right? We need to be able to see, how people who are half awake want to preserve the structures for their legacy and their grandchildren. We need to see how there's a huge host of sleepers who are just following the currents as they're going out there. And we need to recognize that the ones that are truly woke AF and seething for this alchemical rise of the phoenix are could use some professionalization, you know, being more professional and getting some of the education that we all want, but also that we just need to be flexible to recognize that we're holding the paradox. We're holding space for the paradox a little bit, because this is a long process through 2026, okay? We're also going to have a Venus star point coming in Gemini, you know, so all this is sort of happening around Beltane, over here around May Day. And that, you know, making it be very beautiful and valuable. The money shot is in being flexible like that and being teachable, and about communications, and about, you know, recognizing how to work with the digital landscape, okay? And so I'm going to talk about that more in this week's astrology video. Okay, and so I guess in addition, sort of just to wrap up this video, like what I'm trying to say here is that, you know, we see that, you know, we have the wheel of the year and the outer planet transits, and just as those go, you know, we see sort of that Saturn square Uranus and going all the way to Pluto trine Uranus, right, is what's going to be coming in the red shift of 2026. 2025 in the blue shift, we're going to be working on Pluto trine Uranus. And so that's related to the Pluto-Uranus conjunction square, right? This is the next aspect, a benefic aspect that's a trine, right? In 2025 during the blue shift, and then the red shift, we'll see it come out. So beyond just those sort of outer planets, we also have these other things going on, which are like the nodes shifting, okay? And so the nodes are currently in Cancer, and they're going to be moving to Gemini, and then in 2022. In 2023, we'll move to 2022 into Taurus, 2023 into Aries, North Node here we're talking about, 2025 into Pisces, 2026 North Node in Aquarius, right? South Node in Leo. Now that's really interesting, because I'm telling you that's when the Aquarian, that's when we can actually see fruitions of this coming along, right? Like we can't really expect that, like when this conjunction happens in December, that's just going to usher in this new philosophical king's empire, right? His kingdom. No, it's not until 2026. So we have work to do, and it's going to be a little bit chaotic. It's going to be a little bit hard, right? Because we're dealing with these, you know, the old structures of Saturn are quite rigid and quite dark, right? So it may not be the easiest time to get to 2026, but the good news is that, you know, coming in the red shift to 2026, we should see positive aspects and a cooperation of resonance happening between these archetypes. And then, so the nodes will be shifting, but in 2026, that North Node is going to be in Aquarius, right? So drawing in our will around, you know, around being that Aquarian leader. Now, we also have to notice that eclipses will be happening during this, right? So we've got the transits of the inner planets, and especially the eclipses between the two luminaries, our head and our heart, or our prana, our life force and vitality, and our sentiment and our emotions, and our tying back to the center of the one. So there, you know, and the lessons that come in from that, you know, from those two sides of the alignment between the macrocosm and the microcosm, and how those will imprint the charts as they come, right? And also we have Venus star points that will be happening, you know, through that, and I actually wrote them all out, but I don't think I need to tell you all of that at this point. So I think in conclusion, I just wanted to say that, yeah, I mean, this is like mostly coming from Richard Tarnas, but it's looking at the way that governments and sort of the bigger board game of the astrology, and the big power plays that are happening, and you know, which teams do we align with, which, you know, probably Jupiter and the new philosophical king, right? But you can see the challenges that king is going to have, and that king has, right? And so, you know, are we voting in Bernie Sanders at this conjunction? I'm not so sure, you know, because it looks like we're going to be trying to work constructively and be in kind of a centrist position, and plus the fact that we have so many sleepers that are being animated by fear porn, right, and creating aberrations in our philosophy and the way that we can work with those systems, and we have to account for them because we are the philosophical king, so we're leading them as well. okay? And we don't want to lead them into FEMA camps or into a bloodbath or into things like this. So we need to be thinking constructively in this way and thinking about how we can work with all the structure, work with Saturn and work with the limitations in order to transform from within. I would say that that would be the goal. That's at least the goal of Jupiter moving into the first conjunction here, okay? Because the Virgo full moon is also making us feel very pragmatic, etc. So yeah, so I think that's all I wanted to say on this for this moment, and I'm going to pause and record a video for the astrology for the week. So with that being said, thanks for watching. Please leave me your questions and comments. You can contact me at my website at www.earthstarom.com, and you can get readings there. I have an e-zine kind of thing that I'll make for your sun and your moon and your rising sign if you want like a little graphic kind of thing, or you know, and I have hour readings, I have tarot card readings, etc. So please do hit me up on the website. I appreciate your support. You can also offer donations there if you have the means. They're greatly appreciated. It allows me to do this work. So with that being said, be good family, find the others, play your note, and be kind. Love you guys. Bye.